Starting us off at number 10, Reddit user Turtle Shell Magic's story. Now this one is crazy, referring to her best friends as M and L for the sake of the story, goes as follows. At M's house, the gang was using a Ouija board and asked how the spirit died, to which it responded murder. When they asked the spirit for the details of the murder, it responded, not I. It also gave a name which the user couldn't remember and a date from the 1800s. Then the mood in the room just changed. The planchette was ripped out of the girl's hands and flew across the room. At that point, they put the box away and stopped playing with it. A week later, M's mother suddenly passed away from cancer. It was a total surprise as no one knew she was ill. Not long after, L's mom was hospitalized for having a severe drinking problem. And that same week, this user's mother had an emergency hysterectomy surgery. They claim the board must have had something to do with it, and ever since that night, they've heard voices, footsteps, and seen dark shadows. It'd been 9 years and the Reddit user still felt as if they were haunted.
Coming in at number 9 now, we have the Winged Shadow. So this one's from Jo, who played with the Ouija board with her friend. They were communicating with some sort of spirit, but its replies didn't seem malevolent, so they just stopped playing. Determined not to be hit with any kind of bad juju, the friend got rid of the board, and that was that. But every night at 3:15 AM, Jo started waking up feeling completely terrified. She had no idea why, but she got the feeling someone was in her room with her, and she would refuse to look in that direction of the room. This continued for a few weeks before she investigated that corner in the daytime to find the Ouija board there, despite literally seeing her friend get rid of it. Jo threw it away again, but again she kept waking up at 3:15 and realized the board was somehow back in her room. Even her roommate started saying her part of the house just seemed shadowy and creepy. The shadows inside her room were also getting worse to the point there'd be 4 nights a week she legit wouldn't even sleep. One night her dog kept growling and crying at something behind her while she was walking through her house, and she was like, shit, is there something behind me? She slowly turned around and what she saw made her heart stop. She ran for her life as fast as she could away from the monster literally coming after her. This entity was a huge thing that had wings stretching from the ceiling to the floor. Its body didn't touch the ground and its head was cloaked and also not attached to the body. After getting to her room, she locked herself in the bathroom and stayed there all night. Anne has since gone through extensive therapy, and I mean, I get it, I would have to as well.
Moving on to number 8 from Reddit user Hammerhands. So a group of college friends decided to gather in a dorm room one night and take out the Ouija board. Some had used one before while others were skeptical it worked at all. Around 11 PM they had one of their skeptics named Gary sit down and communicate. He asked if it was real or all BS, to which the planchette rushed over to no. Gary then asked for the board to prove it was the real deal, which is when the lights started to flicker in the dorm and the building's fire alarm went off. The students were all evacuated outside, so they locked their door and headed out. After about 20 minutes it was determined to be a false alarm, so the students returned back to their dorm room only to find that the Ouija board had gone missing. And who knows what happened to Gary ever since that night. I certainly haven't heard from him.
Coming in at number 7 is Angela Jackson. Now, Angela attended a spiritualist meeting wherein a psychic gave her a warning that her deceased dad was trying to tell her. He said, "You're thinking about using a Ouija board? Don't. No good will come of it." Ignoring this, she went to her neighbor's house and pulled out her own homemade Ouija board. Like, really, Angela? Just listen to your dad. He knows better. The two started playing and the spirit spelled out that it wanted to speak to Angela and then spelled out, "Die, bitch." The spirit claimed he was Satan and he had been murdered just like you will be. Honestly, firstly, how does one even murder Satan? Can you even murder Satan? Anyway, the glass they were using as a planchette then flew across the room and shattered, and at that point they were like, okay, well this is over. Over the next few months, Angela tried to convince her friends to contact the spirit again, but she never communicated with Satan again. Having given up and forgotten about it, she was on her way to her son's house one day when she heard a growl behind her of a man saying, "Die, bitch." Why did he say that? She turned around and saw a man wielding a claw hammer which he used to hit her on the head twice. Angela ended up waking up in the hospital with a fractured skull, alive, but still lives in fear that she'll get murdered one day.
And into the number 6 spot, the Mexican Ouija board story. 22-year-old Alexandra Huerta, her brother 23-year-old Sergio Huerta, and their 18-year-old cousin Fernando Cuvez were all hospitalized after messing around with a Ouija board while in Mexico. Apparently just minutes into using the board, the 3 young adults were showing symptoms of someone possessed. More specifically, Alexandra was growling and flailing her arms as if she was being controlled by an evil entity. Sergio and Fernando allegedly started showing symptoms of blindness, deafness, and hallucinations. At first, the family's parents asked a priest to perform an exorcism, but he refused because they weren't regular churchgoers. The family then called paramedics who had to restrain Alexandra so she wouldn't hurt herself or anyone else, and provided all through with painkillers, sedatives, and eye drops, which seemed to work and stop whatever it was that took over these 3 young adults.
Now at number 5 is the nuisance. This one's from Jeanette K, who said this happened to her when she was 11 years old. Now Jeanette's sister and 2 friends decided to play with a homemade Ouija board while she was doing homework in the next room. A few minutes go by and she sees this person walk by the kitchen, but it wasn't a person. It was a solid black shadow of a man, and he had made no sounds or footsteps. She brushed it off as her just seeing things, but then her little brother was like, "Did you just see that shadow too?" So now she was like, damn it was definitely real. Their sister and her friends came in at that moment saying they stopped playing because the spirit had left. And I mean, she wasn't wrong, it did leave the game, but it didn't leave their lives. It started haunting them at home, opening and closing doors at any given time of the day, loud footsteps when no one else was home, random cold spots throughout the house, lights flickering on and off for no reason, you know the whole haunting spiel by now. The spirit would even push their mattress from beneath when they were asleep. Like, it was just a very general nuisance all around, and it stayed with them for 5 more years before finally leaving.
Sliding to number 4, Reddit user No Springs. When our friend here was about 12 or 13 years old, they decided to get together with some friends and play Ouija. At first, the board started spelling things out that apparently scared them, and then wrote out, "I could see you through the window," followed by "I could see you through his eyes," and then "I'm under the car." Somehow this group of brave teens mustered up the courage to go outside into the dark night and check under the car, where they found a hissing black cat. Bad vibes. Of course, scared to death, the group of friends ran back inside, which is when the power immediately shut off. A few minutes later, it turned back on, but the group decided to stay up all night long and never touch the board again.
Filling our number 3 slot is Jackson. Now this story was shared by Carol, and it occurred back in 1978 when she was about 12 years old. While her dad was at work, her and her mum decided to play with a Ouija board. Nice mother-daughter bonding activity. Her mum asked who they were speaking to, and the planchette spelled out Jackson, even though none of them knew a Jackson. She then asked if he was a good spirit, and he replied saying no. She asked how he died next, but the planchette didn't move. Getting a bit scared at this point, her mum said, "Since you're not gonna tell us, we're gonna say goodbye now," and then Jackson pointed to no. Adamant on leaving, her mum said goodbye, and then so did Jackson. That night, Carol heard this growling sound coming through from underneath her floor, and so she went and got her mum to investigate, but as soon as she walked into the room, it just stopped. Her mum also smoked cigarettes, but that night her cigs smelled like sulfur, and she claimed they tasted like it too. Things are getting pretty sus at this point, I'm not gonna lie. Anyway, 3 days later, the growling started up again, and they got the dad to go out and investigate, but there was nothing outside, no animal, nothing that could have made that sound. It got louder and started getting more guttural, and at this point everyone was shitting themselves, like everyone. Her mom started yelling at the floor and telling it to stop, and after 2 hours it finally did. The next day her mom got quite sick, and her temperature was around 102 degrees. Fahrenheit, not Celsius, I'm not gonna make that same mistake again. Ha! They took her to the hospital and they found that she had an infection all through her body, and had they left it 1 more day she would have died. The family believed that Jackson must have died from a blood infection that he was never treated for, and that's how the mom's condition came about, because she was completely healthy before that.
And at 2, the killer Ouija board. Way back in 1935, a man was arrested for shooting his wife in the back a total of 4 times. The man claimed he did it in self-defense, as he was being abused by his wife on a regular basis. The reason for the abuse? His wife would communicate with the Ouija board every week, which would tell her the alleged things her husband had been doing. One of those things had been cheating with a neighbor. Another was that he gave that neighbor a large sum of money. At first, the wife would try to call her husband out for the lie, saying she caught him again. Then things got worse, as she would tie him to bedposts with wires and whip him. Eventually she started to prod him and stab his shins with a knife. It wasn't until she had a gun to his head that he would confess to everything, just telling her what she wanted to hear in hopes of stopping the abuse. After she let him free and stepped away for a moment, the husband saw his chance and grabbed the gun she left on the nightstand. He shot her, and upon explaining his story to the courts, his killing was justified due to the fact that this man feared for his life.
And finally, at number 1 we have the goodbye. Now this one was shared by Redditor Celine the Moon Titan, and she said that when she was 14, she and her 2 friends decided to play with a Ouija board. They didn't think anything would happen until the planchette started spelling out hello. Intrigued, they started asking the thing questions like where it was, etc., and it responded vaguely, but then all of a sudden it started moving towards random letters and numbers on its own. Freaking out, they stopped playing, stuffed the board back in the box, and tried to forget what just happened. And that's where it all went tits up. Now the whole weekend after that, they could tell there was some sinister energy in the air. On the Monday, the user saw a tall shadowy figure standing in the corner of her bedroom, just looking at her, but she tried to convince herself she was just seeing things. People need to stop doing that. You are seeing what you are seeing. That night, she felt a heavy sensation on her body all night, and when she woke up, she had scratches all over her arms. Coincidence? I think not. It got worse the more time went on. The user started hearing voices and would wake up with bruises. A year later, she moved house, but the spirit went with her. It would throw her off her bed every single night, so we know it was attached to her, not the house. She claims now her whole body is filled with bruises, and the voices she hears have been getting so loud to the point sometimes she can't even think because the voices are all she hears. She would go places and just not remember going there, and the last thing she remembered was a spirit in the corner of her room saying, "You will join us, we will pull you in." Ugh. Would not like to be her, I'm sorry.
Starting off this countdown, we have the rules. So for those of you who don't know, Ouija boards come with a strict set of rules. When I was young and dumb, I never knew these rules, and me and my friends would just fool around with no care. Seriously, like, the board doesn't come with a set of instructions. At least the one that I had didn't. But these rules are super important. Let me stress that again. Super important. Basically, if you don't accurately follow them, then it puts all the players at risk. So here are some important rules to follow. And in no means is this meant to be like a guide for you to use. So you should always say goodbye when you're done playing. And by saying goodbye, I mean you actually say it verbally and then you move the planchette to goodbye. This should cut the connection between the spiritual world and our world. You also can never tease, disrespect, or make fun of the spirits or board. This angers them. You should never play alone. This makes you more vulnerable to being attacked by evil spirits. Never play in a cemetery. It's pretty self-explanatory. Never ask the board when you're going to die. Never burn the board. Never invite the entity to make noise or show itself. And lastly, never ever leave the planchette on the board. It's considered bad luck. There are several more rules you have to follow, but basically if you mess up the rules or don't follow them, then it puts yourself in danger. In our ninth spot, we have the manipulation. Ouija boards open the doors for anything to come through to speak to you. What's scary is that you don't know the intentions of the spirits that you get in contact with. In fact, it's said that evil spirits will often manipulate the players to gain their trust. They may do so by telling you information you want to hear. They may claim that they're a deceased relative, but in turn, they can just say that so that they can gain control of you. Once you let your guard down, thinking you're in contact with a peaceful spirit, then they can use this to get into our world and wreak havoc on your life. Moving on to number 8, we have the connection. If you are foolish enough to play with an Ouija board, just know that you should never use it in your home. The reason being, well, if you don't properly break the connection between the spirits you summoned, then guess what? They are now going to be residing in your home. Basically, they will feed off your energy and try to weaken you to gain control of you. Their energy will constantly be present in your home and you'll be subjected to constant torment. In our 7th spot, we have the malevolent spirits. Like I mentioned before, the Ouija board opens the doors to the spiritual world. There's no way to predict or control what comes through. As a result, you may get in contact with a malevolent spirit with sinister intentions. They could physically and mentally hurt you. Now, if you're using the board and the planchette starts counting down or going through the alphabet, then you should immediately end your session by saying goodbye. A lot of users claim that this is one sign that you have gotten in contact with an evil spirit. Another warning sign is if the planchette repeatedly makes a figure 8 or infinity symbol. Again, you should end the session immediately by saying goodbye. This is another thing that evil spirits will do. So stay safe and please don't allow evil spirits into our world. Moving on to number 6, we have the possession. Okay. One of the more obvious reasons to why you shouldn't use the board is because you could become possessed. This isn't a joke. There have been several reports of Ouija boards triggering demonic possessions. In November 2014, 35 students at a school in Bolivia were all sent to the hospital after playing with an Ouija board. It was believed that they all became possessed. They had fallen into a trance-like state, were profusely sweating, were more aggressive, and had rapid pulses. Then, over the years, there have been other reports of people getting possessed while using this board. Mexico especially is said to have a lot of reported possessions. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the creepy doll. Now, if you still think that it's okay to play with an Ouija board, then here is a true story that will convince you otherwise. This story was posted on Reddit by the user Jake Nichols. He shares the time that him and his family were using a Ouija board in their basement. Good family bonding, I guess. At first, the board wasn't really working. Then out of nowhere, it said one of the guy's social security number. Then the entity started sharing more creepy personal information. The last thing the entity spelled out was the word doll. Well, Prior to playing with the board, the group moved a porcelain doll out of the room and placed it on a stack of towels. They did this because they were creeped out of having the doll in the same room as them. After the Ouija board spelled the word doll, they heard a knock on the door where they put the porcelain doll in. When they opened the door, the doll was now standing upright, straight in front of them, staring at them. Moving on at number 4, we have the death date. Again, this is a real story. This story was posted on Reddit by the user Anuvin. Basically, there was this one girl who was friends with a boy named Johnny who was suffering from cystic fibrosis. As a result, he was recently hospitalized. One day, her and her friend Shelly decided to play with an Ouija board. One of the questions they asked was about Johnny's condition, but all the board did was spell out the date, June 24th, 1987. Well, on June 24th, Johnny sadly passed away. That's crazy. It just shows you how powerful these spirits are and how much they know about us and our lives. In our third spot, we have the injuries. Demons or evil spirits are very, very powerful and should never be underestimated. If you come in contact with one while playing, then they could physically or mentally harm you. In fact, one man who played with an Ouija board claims that he woke up with sore, unexplained bruises all over his body. Another woman was playing with the board when she felt like she was being choked. She couldn't breathe, and later there were bruise marks on her neck. Other players claim that they have been scratched by entities, and one even claims that after using the board, he was pushed down the stairs by something that they had contacted. In our second spot, we have Zozo. Using an Ouija board puts you at risk for contacting an evil demon known as Zozo. On March 24th, 2009, the presence of Zozo first came to light when a man named Darren Evans shared his interactions with Zozo online. He was playing with a board when he contacted a spirit who called itself Zozo. At first, according to Evans' account, the interactions with Zozo were seemingly harmless. He experienced noises, moving objects, and flickering lights. Then he started getting scratches and bruises on his skin. During one session with Zozo, he had to rush into the bathroom where his girlfriend was giving their 1-year-old daughter a bath. His girlfriend was gone, and the tub was overflowing, and his daughter was drowning. He believes that Zozo was behind this. Now, you see, tons of other people have come forward and claimed that they have also come in contact with a spirit that calls itself Zozo. It is said to target mentally unstable and vulnerable users. Zozo even has been linked to murders and suicides throughout the world. In fact, this entity dates back to 1816. It is mentioned in the book Dictionnaire Infernal by Colin de Plancy. This book tells the story of a young girl who gets possessed by 3 demons: Minnie, Capulet, and Zozo. It's said that if Zozo reveals itself while you're using the board, to end the session immediately before you become his next victim. And in our number 1 spot, we have the death. This reason alone should prevent you from playing with an Ouija board. It is said that the board can kill you. Well, not the board itself, although I'm sure some people have used it as a weapon sometime in their life. But no, the board itself isn't deadly, it's the spirits you get in contact with that are. So evil spirits can kill you in multiple ways. They could cause you to get a viral disease by attacking your immune system. They can manipulate you mentally so that you end up taking your own life. Or they can cause unexplained accidents. In fact, one girl claims that a spirit that her and her friends contacted was responsible for her friend's mother's death. Apparently, after contacting the spirit through the board, a week later, her mom's friend died suddenly from cancer. Then the same week, her own mom was rushed into the emergency room, but thankfully, she survived. In another account, a girl says that her grandmother was killed after messing with an Ouija board. Later that day, her grandmother was struck and killed by a distracted driver. So not only do Ouija boards have the power to take your life, but they can also kill your loved ones too. Starting off this countdown, we have Eliza. One day, a girl and her friends decided to fool around with an Ouija board. To make it 10 times worse, they decided that the perfect location to use it in would be the cemetery. So they went to the cemetery, set up the board in a clearing, and started asking it questions. At first, nothing really happened. Then all of a sudden, the planchette moved by itself and spelled out the name Eliza. They kept asking the board questions and found out that she was 54 when she passed away. Now, the girls were thinking that one of their friends was just moving the planchette, so they weren't scared. That was until they packed up to leave. As they were leaving the cemetery, they stumbled upon a tombstone. It read, Eliza Taylor, 1862 to 1916. So they were in contact with a real spirit this whole time. And the last message that she sent to them was, don't go. She wanted them to all stay with her. In our 9th spot, we have George. When Reddit user Treeman was little, his mom invited him to play in a Ouija board with her. Not judging, but I am. Why? Why would you invite your kid to play? It's not a game. Anyways, he joined in and started spelling out joke words like poop and fart. He found it so funny. That was until her mom asked the board about her missing friend. He had been missing for a month or so and no one knew where he was. At first, the board spelt out George, the name of the friend who went missing. The next thing it spelt out was lake. About 2 weeks later, they found George's body. He had been hit by a car while on a bridge and his body fell into the lake below. The Ouija board literally solved this man's disappearance. In our 8th spot today, we have the creepy doll. So a couple of years ago, the narrator, his cousins, dad, and best friend were all using an Ouija board in their basement. Now, prior to using the board, they decided to move this creepy porcelain doll out from the basement and place it into another room. Good idea, dolls creep me out. Plus, we've seen Annabelle, we know that demons can inhabit dolls. Anyways, they began using the board, and at first, it wasn't working. That was until the planchette started moving randomly to random numbers. But these weren't any numbers. They were one of the guy's social security numbers. To make sure it wasn't a prank, they asked the board to show itself or to prove that it was really there with them. That's when it spelled out the word doll. They all immediately rushed into the other room where they had placed that porcelain doll. And as soon as they opened the door, they saw the doll standing right up in front of the door, staring right at them. If I was them, I would just never sleep again. That is horrifying. Moving on to number 7, we have Under the Car. This story was submitted by Reddit user No Springs. According to them, when they were 12 or 13, they decided to fool around with an Ouija board with their friends and his sister one night. They weren't taking it seriously at first. They all took turns moving the planchette to try and spook each other. That was until the board spelled out, "I can see you through the window." And then it said, "I can see you through his eyes." They kept asking it questions and it spelled out, "I'm under the car." So they actually went outside and looked under their car. As soon as they did, a huge black cat leaped out and hissed at them. They all ran back inside the house, and as soon as they did, the power failed. That's the last time they ever played with the Ouija board. Serves them right. In our 6th spot today, we have The Death. This story was submitted by Turtle Shell Magic on Reddit. So a couple of years ago, they were playing with an Ouija board with 2 of their friends. That's when they got in contact with a spirit. They asked it how it died, which, first off, you're not supposed to do that, but they did it anyway. It spelt out the word murder. They then asked it how it was murdered, and it said, "Not I." That's when the room started to get heavy. The energy shifted completely and the friends knew that something was wrong. Then, out of nowhere, the planchette flew from out underneath their hands and it flew across the room. They immediately stopped playing. Then a week later, one of the friends' moms died unexpectedly. Another one of the friends' mom was hospitalized, and the narrator's mom had an emergency hysterectomy. They believe that whoever they summoned that night came after their moms and murdered the one mother. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Roger. Back in the 90s, Reddit user Ouija1993 had some girls in his 9th grade class say that they've been playing with an Ouija board. They told him that they've been in contact with a spirit named Roger. So he decided to join them after school one time to see if they were being serious or if it was cap. At first, he wasn't buying it and thought the girls were just moving the planchette by themselves. So he decided to ask the board a question that only he should have known the answer to. He had just gotten his grade back from a science test, so he asked the board what his mark was, and the board got it right. So he believed that it was real and they continued on playing with the board. That was until the board kept calling one of the girls the B word, like it really hated her, but it seemed to have a liking towards him. Eventually, they learned that Roger had been stabbed to death. After that night, the guy decided to go home and look for any murders in the area involving a man named Roger. And sure enough, he found the spirit that they had been talking to. His name was Roger Stevenson, a 35-year-old man who was stabbed to death during a robbery gone wrong. His attacker's name was Sam. Remember that girl that Roger didn't like and kept calling a Well, her name was Sam. Coming in at number 4, we have the Entity. Like I said, you don't want to play with Ouija boards. You run the risk of unleashing some evil entity or demon, which is exactly what happened to this next user. So they were using the board all by themselves, and they didn't say goodbye to it properly. After that, they kept feeling as if something was watching them. Then weird things started happening. Doors would open and close on their own. They would hear footsteps in the house. Sometimes they would even wake up in the middle of the night to their covers being pulled off of them. Not only that, but the Ouija board would sometimes disappear only to reappear somewhere else days later. Eventually, it got so bad that she needed to get her house blessed. She had her hair pulled, her body scratched, and she was even choked. One time, she even saw the entity appear in the corner of her room. It presented itself as a dark mass. Needless to say, this is a great example as to why you don't mess with the paranormal. Coming in at number 3, we have the instructions. In 1983, Bunny Dixon, her boyfriend Anthony Hall, and another couple were fooling around with the Ouija board when it gave them a very specific set of instructions. It told them to flee their home and join a carnival in Virginia. It also told them to rob and murder a motorist in order to get enough money to follow through with this plan. So they did what the board asked them to. They killed a motorist and robbed him and fled. But eventually the couples turned on each other and were all arrested. They tried to blame the board for their actions, but that did them no good and they were all convicted of murder. Moving on to number 2, we have the Sacrifice. In 1995 in London, 2 young boys, Michael McCallum and Michael Eridge, decided to play with an Ouija board. While playing with the board, it spelled out kill. McCallum took this as a sign to kill the other Michael. He thought that he was in contact with Satan and that he was making a sacrifice for him. In the end, he was charged with manslaughter and served his time inside of a mental institution. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the wood chipper. One day, this narrator was talking to her great aunt and got on the topic of marriage. She then asked her why she was never married. And apparently when she was 16, she did have a pretty serious boyfriend. One night she was using a Ouija board and asked it if he would be the man she would marry. The board responded with no. She then asked it if they would break up. It also said no. So she asked if one of them was going to die. It responded with yes. She asked it if it was her or her boyfriend, and it said goodbye. A week later, the boyfriend was in a wood chipper accident at the mill where he worked and he passed away. The Ouija board had predicted this. Starting off this countdown, we have the Apparitions. Do not use this board unless you want to see ghosts or apparitions. You're gonna be like the kid in The Sixth Sense when you see dead people. You are quite literally welcoming any sort of spirit into your house. Who knows their intentions? They could be evil. In this next case, the spirit was. So according to the story, a bunch of teen girls were playing with a Ouija board at a sleepover. Things slowly started to get scary. They heard footsteps from above them when they were on the top floor, and the door would swing open on its own. But that wasn't the creepiest part. At around 4 or 5 a.m., the girls woke up and saw a black figure walking up and down the hallway. One girl screamed and the figure lunged right at her. So, unless you feel like getting attacked and seeing some ghosts, don't use this board. In our 9th spot, we have the personal experience. That's right, I'm going to be sharing with you one of my personal experiences using an Ouija board. So this was back when I was in grade 8. My friend got me an Ouija board as a gift for my birthday. I guess she wanted to get me cursed or something. Then as a joke, me, her, and my other friend took the board into a closet in my basement and decided to fool around with it. Now, in this closet there is this old, creepy, mirrored wardrobe. This thing is ancient, like the mirror is all cracked and scratched internally. But we thought it'd be a good idea to sit in front of the mirror to call upon spirits. Now, my friend was trying to contact the spirit of her aunt Nora. Nothing was happening for a while, but that's when I looked in the mirror. So behind me were 2 boxes stacked up, and on top of that was a ski helmet. In the mirror, I saw that the helmet above me was slowly rocking back and forth. I then proceeded to say, "Hey guys, look." But before I could finish the sentence, the helmet flew off the box and hit me on the head, and we were all terrified. Now, we were also stupid because we never said goodbye to the spirit or whatever to the board, so who knows what's still lurking in my basement. After that experience, I gave that board away. True story.
creepy.
In our 8th spot, we have the Revenge. Like I mentioned previously, you are taking a gamble when you use one of these boards. You really don't know who you're going to contact. You could quite literally summon a demon that wants to harm you. Now, here's the thing. You have to be super careful when using the board because you don't want to risk angering a spirit. If you do, then the spirit can get revenge on you, as demonstrated by this next story. So one night a group of friends were using an Ouija board. One of the skeptical friends kept dissing the board and calling it BS. Well, whatever they summoned got mad at him. The lights in the room started to flicker before turning completely off. When the lights turned back on, the friend had a huge red burning scratch mark down his arm. Told ya, don't mess around with spirits. Coming in at number 7, we have the Evidence. Here's another story to deter you from ever using the board, unless you want to run into real life dead bodies. So this story was posted on Reddit by the user The Tree Man. One day he was using an Ouija board with his mom. When they were using the board, it spelt out the name George. Well, apparently his mom's friend George had been missing for a month or so. When she asked the board where he was, the board said in a lake. Well, 2 weeks later, they found George's body. Apparently he got hit by a car on a bridge and ended up in the lake below. Very sad and also very scary. Coming in at number 6, we have the True Story. So here is another true story that should scare you away from this deadly board if you aren't scared already. So according to this woman, she would often play with an Ouija board in her dorm room. During one occasion, she asked the board who she was going to marry, and it responded with her current husband's initials. His initials are RAW for Robert Allen Whitty. That's pretty creepy, but that's not the scary part. While playing with the board one night, she accidentally let in a demon that terrorized her for months. It all started off with innocent stuff. She would hear footsteps or doors would open and close on their own. Eventually, the paranormal activity picked up. Books would fly off shelves and hit her. Plates would fall out of cupboards and smash to the floor. And at one point, she was pushed against a wall by a dark force. So, if you thought your roommate was bad, try rooming with an angry ghost for months. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the night terrors. There are several stories about people getting really bad night terrors after playing with an Ouija board. These dreams were typically about their greatest fears. Whatever you're afraid of, the spirits will use this against you to taunt you and torture you in your sleep. In the middle of the night, these individuals would jolt awake, their heart pounding, sweating profusely, and worst of all, hearing voices. One girl said that she felt like someone was whispering into her ear. So, say goodbye to ever getting a good night's sleep again. In our 4th spot, we have the Foolish Behavior. If you do play with an Ouija board, it's said to never use it alone. It makes you way too vulnerable. But there's one big problem about playing the board with a big group. Maybe not all of the participants are going to take it seriously. You'll probably have at least one individual who will fool around. And guess what? That puts you all at risk. Maybe the person will joke around and invite the spirit to possess them or say something stupid that will anger the spirit. And then, well, it will end badly for all of you. Making our way down the list at number 3, we have the Returning Board. So let's say you did make the grave mistake to play with the board. You could just get rid of it and all your problems would go away, right? Wrong. There have been multiple stories of people getting rid of the board only for it to find its way back to them. The nightmare never goes away. I don't even know how that's possible, like the boards don't have legs. But it has happened. One person said it happened to her aunt. She said that her aunt was playing with the board with her friends. After they were done, she tossed it in her closet. The next day when she got home, the board was on her bed. This continued for days. She would put the board away and the next day it would be back on her bed. She eventually threw the board into a nearby river. But you guessed it, the board still came back. In our 2nd spot, we have the Burning. So let's say you do want to get rid of the board after it comes back. Whatever you do, do not burn it. It is said that that's one of the most dangerous things for anyone to do. By burning the board, you are releasing all of the spirits from the board. These spirits then have free roam in our world. Burning also releases all of the negative energy that has been contained in the board. This is said to bring extreme bad luck. There have been accounts of people's houses burning down after doing so. Also, it's not good for the environment, so let's not burn these boards, please. And in our number 1 spot, we have the questions. So, like I mentioned in my last video, Ouija boards have a strict set of rules that you have to follow. If you don't, you put yourself and the other players at risk. Now, one rule that's really important is to never ask certain questions. You are never supposed to ask the board when you're going to die. Why? Well, for starters, maybe the entity is uncomfortable discussing death, and then you've just upset them. Or maybe they will try and manipulate you with this date and make you fear for your life. Lastly, you could create a self-fulfilling prophecy and die on the date or the way the board told you. There's a popular story of a guy who asked this question. The board responded with 11. He asked, 11 years? The board began to spell out minutes. The guy got really angry and flipped the board. He died that night in a car accident. So I hope this list will make you think twice before ever playing with this board.